Vioxx is a terrible tragedy and a profound regulatory failure. I would argue that the FDA as currently configured is incapable of protecting America against another Vioxx. We are virtually defenseless. It is important that this committee and the American people understand that what happened with Vioxx is really a symptom of something far more dangerous to the safety of the American people. Simply put, FDA and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research are broken.
Since November, when I appeared before the Senate Finance Committee and announced to the world that FDA was incapable of protecting America from unsafe drugs or from another Vioxx, very little has changed on the surface, and substantively nothing has changed.
We are faced with what may be the single greatest drug safety catastrophe in the history of this country. I strongly believe that this should have been, and largely could have been, avoided, but it wasn't, and over 100,000 Americans have paid dearly for this failure. In my opinion, the FDA has let the American people down.
I believe that FDA is unduly influenced by industry, and that undue influence is in part the result of industry money funding FDA operations.
There's an epidemic in the United States, one that has been missed by the mainstream media. In fact, there's no congressional hearings on it. There's no major effort to challenge it or change it. I'm talking about the epidemic of preventable diseases in the United States. Imagine this, 131 million overweight Americans, many of them toddlers and young children. We have an epidemic of diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, fibromyalgia, depression, anxiety disorders, environmental diseases. How did we get so sick? And why, after spending $2 trillion and over 700,000 physicians, over 2 million people in the health field, out of all of our hospitals and medications and medical procedures, why aren't we closer to eliminating these illnesses? I'm Gary Null. In this original, in-depth investigative report on over-medicating Americans, we're going to be asking some hard questions about where's this money going? Who is leading our healthcare crisis campaign? Are we spending any energy and money and resources on preventing these conditions? You turn on television and all you see are ads for either medications if you're sick or products that can make you sick, and especially the children. How did we get here? What can we do to challenge this? That's what we're going to explore. Join me now for this special look at our crisis in healthcare in the United States.
One of the pieces that I wrote for the British Medical Journal recently was about drug company influence at the FDA. And so the front cover of the British Medical Journal had the question, who owns the FDA? The drug industry or the people? To be raising such a question in one of the world's most senior medical journals shows that there is a massive crisis of legitimacy at the FDA.
The major issue Americans confront today is the fact that the FDA acts to protect the financial interests of the pharmaceutical industry as opposed to the health of the American public.
Within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, about 80% of the resources are geared towards the approval of new drugs, and 20% is for everything else. Drug safety is about 5%. Congress has created that structure by PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, by which drug companies pay money to FDA so that FDA will review and approve its drugs. For industry, every day that a drug is held up from being marketed, in their minds, that's another $1 to $2 million of profit that they're being denied. And so the incentive is really review the drugs as quickly as possible, approve them as quickly as possible, and don't stand in the way of our making profit. And FDA cooperates with that mandate.
The regulated activities of the Food and Drug Administration are in large measure financed directly by the pharmaceutical companies.
More than 50% of the money that the FDA spends reviewing drugs comes from the pharmaceutical companies. Many people see that as an absurd conflict of interest, and indeed many are calling for an end to such user-pays funding.
That destroys this arm's length relationship. This destroys the distance that ought to prevail between the Food and Drug Administration and the pharmaceutical companies.
And once that funding started coming from the drug companies, they started calling the shots. And basically they said, we're not going to continue to provide this funding unless you help us get these drugs to market. So basically the FDA got marching orders in the mid-90s, started helping bring drugs to market, do it quickly, and they basically have served those masters ever since. We've really been betrayed by the FDA, and that's the only way to put it.
Well, it's kind of weird, but the day before I had my stroke, I couldn't find home plate. You know, I was pitching batting practice to my kids, which I do all the time, and I just could not throw a strike to save my life. Even now I have a little bit more trouble than I used to. Well, I started taking anti-inflammatory drugs in the year 1999. In, I believe it was January of 2002, I switched over to Vioxx, and I was taking it probably 3 or 4 times a week for about 6 months. Thanks. I'll never forget it. It was a Monday. I collapsed at work. I had a stroke right then and there at work. Found myself in the hospital that afternoon. As a result of that, I couldn't walk. I couldn't speak effectively.
We have thousands of people who are being injured by products that the companies know are unsafe. I mean, that FDA knows is unsafe. FDA knew there was a problem with Vioxx. They knew there was a big problem back in mid-2000. They did nothing about it.
The left side of my body is, it doesn't work right. And I was working with a piece of woodworking and the blade hit my thumb and scared to death. It's all going up for sale. Every bit of it. And this is all industrial grade stuff. To this day I have a sleep disorder. I have panic disorder. I have extreme fatigue, which is related due to the sleep disorder.
FDA is responsible for 140,000 heart attacks, 60,000 dead Americans. That's as many people as were killed in the Vietnam War.
I'm a family physician and, had a thriving practice basically at the peak of my professional career, a passionate practice. I did the majority of my work with kids with psychiatric and psychological disorders, and the type of job I could have done for nothing. Unfortunately, since my stroke, we've had to put our house up for sale. As a result of the disability, I've been unable to work. And to tell you the truth, we can't even afford to sell the house with a real estate agent, because of the commission that they obtain from it, so I believe what happened to me is a direct result of Vioxx. It's the only explanation that has any merit, and the only logical, simplistic explanation that I can arrive at is that Vioxx caused this situation to occur in my life.
How did this happen? How do we end up having something that can kill 100,000 Americans? And who's responsible?
I think a lot of people think that the approval of drugs by the FDA is tantamount to the FDA guaranteeing that the drug is safe as well as effective. And the truth of the matter is, we never know that to a certainty.
People are frequently under the mistaken impression that once a drug is approved by the FDA, it's extremely safe. In fact, there are very few long-term studies done on particular drugs, and it's not at all uncommon for a drug to be removed from the marketplace because it has been shown to be unsafe.
The FDA is empowered to require drug companies to continue clinical trials of drugs even after they've been approved. And this option, the Phase 4 clinical trials, they're called, is especially useful for drugs that have received expedited review through the FDA. In other words, the FDA has agreed to approve drugs faster than it otherwise would. The trouble is, phase 4 clinical trials aren't used nearly as often as they should be used.
What is the real relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA?
As a drug chemist, I discovered that FDA drug approval wasn't based on science. It was based on financial conflict, where 6 out of 10 scientists who have financial conflicts of interest say, yes, this drug should be approved.
There are people who go to the FDA thinking in the back of their minds if they behave properly towards the industry, they will be rewarded with a job in the industry.
One of the most recent illuminating incidents of that revolving door policy was the presence of a man by the name of Daniel Troy, who was the chief counsel to the FDA for a period of time. And prior to his becoming chief counsel to the FDA, his law firm was very active as an advocate for the pharmaceutical industry, the tobacco industry, and other elements of our economy which are regulated by the FDA. He no longer holds that position, but while he was there, interestingly enough, he was a chief advocate for the economic entities, particularly the pharmaceutical companies, that the FDA oversaw. And of course, when he left his position as chief counsel of the FDA, he went right back to the regulated industry and probably benefited economically from the experience that he had here in Washington.
It used to be that you weren't allowed to have any financial benefits from the drug companies if you were on the advisory board or a member of the FDA or the CDC, but that's not the case anymore. 3 of the 5 people that voted to approve Vioxx were connected to the companies that were manufacturing it.
When you look at the experts who are on television commenting on a story, or on some of the physician websites that are out there that are increasingly popular, or who may be providing testimony to Congress, if you look at their backgrounds and where their money comes from, in the vast majority of cases, unfortunately, it comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And whether they declare the bias or not, they're clearly influenced by who's paying the bill.
If it is true that the drug companies are the ones that are sort of self-evaluating these drugs, of course they have an inherent desire to make these drugs, pass FDA standards. Who's looking out to see if that's really happening? When
I was invited by Senator Grassley's office to testify, I was faced with this dilemma. Do I sort of lay it on the line and tell them the way it really is, or do I kind of downplay it? And there are ways of doing that. But what I concluded was that I'm now being given the opportunity to tell the truth to the people who are in a position to actually make a difference. I can't make a difference. I can't change FDA, but Congress can. If I don't tell them the truth, then I'm now responsible, in part, for the deaths of people that happen in the future. And I'm basically a co-conspirator, if you will, with FDA in what happened with Vioxx, because all these tens of thousands of people were injured or killed because FDA's disregard for safety. And if I kept quiet about that, now I'm part of the problem. I'm one of them. And my conscience tells me, well, you know what you have to do, you know what the truth is, and now are you going to speak it or aren't you?
I started getting arthritis in my hands because I did physical labor on my job, and they put me on Vioxx, and it began as a low dosage. I eventually ended up on the 75 milligrams, and I was on that for 6 or 7 months, and then I started feeling like I couldn't balance right. It was like I was dizzy and I couldn't balance. So I called my doctor, and she said to go to the emergency room, and they admitted me and said I'd had a mild stroke. I've since that time had my whole life turned upside down. I was employed by General Motors in the auto industry, and General Motors talked to my doctor, and my doctor sent me to a rehabilitation specialist, and then they sent me a letter and they said, it's not safe to have you work anymore, we're retiring you. And I was like, I don't want to retire. I get this letter 3 weeks later from Social Security, and they said, your employers contacted us and you're too sick to work and we're going to retire you, and this is when your money starts. And I started calling people. I said, don't take my job. Don't do this. I'm 56. And even with all of that happening, my health was getting worse and worse. And at one point, I got to where I couldn't even stand up straight. And I drag my leg, and my right hand use is kind of limited because it's kind of stiff and dragging.
Back in early 2004, the SSRI, antidepressants, and suicidal behavior was a big safety issue. FDA had suppressed a report written by a colleague of mine in drug safety and had prevented him from presenting this information at an advisory committee meeting. That information got leaked to the media, and it embarrassed FDA because now FDA was caught suppressing information, suppressing its own scientists on a very important public health issue involving children.
The doctor told us that he thought the drug Prozac would help Jacob, that it's a common prescribed drug used in teenagers now, that he thought it would help him with his moods and just make him feel happier. So he was put on Prozac that afternoon, 10 milligrams. The morning of my son's death, we had talked that morning. He did not want to go to school that day, and he just said that he would go the next day. They were getting out for Christmas holidays. I left for work, and a few hours later I began to call home because with him being at home by himself, I was concerned, so I did not get an answer. And I continued to call for a couple of hours, then I left, and it took me 30 minutes to get home, and I found my son hanging in our attic. My husband and I attended a FDA hearing in Washington about the side effects that can happen with these drugs, and unfortunately the first hearing there was 65 parents there. Their children had died while on antidepressants. Some of them were on the drug a matter of days before they committed suicide.
After being on Prozac for 21 days, my wife shot and killed both of these two boys right here. She turned the gun to herself and shot herself twice. Now she's in jail for murder.
Since I've been on Prozac, I've experienced the following adverse reactions. A drug-induced insanity that has caused several self-destructive outbursts. There was an extended period of anger, rage, and hostility, and it turned into terrible feelings that suicide was the only answer.
This is hard for me because I tried to commit suicide in front of my 5 children. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't remember exactly what happened. All I know is that my husband took the gun away from me and my children was looking from the other room. What would have happened if these children had seen their mother commit suicide?
My sister did commit suicide in front of Lindsay. Another woman spoke of hollow point bullets. That's what my sister used to do it.
Prior to my Senate testimony in mid-November of 2004, there was an orchestrated campaign by senior-level FDA managers to intimidate me so that I would not testify before Congress. Our acting Senate director contacted the editor of The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal in the United Kingdom, and intimated to the editor that I had committed scientific misconduct, or that I may have committed scientific misconduct, and that they shouldn't publish a paper that I had written showing that Vioxx increases the risks of heart attack. The second was that other high-level FDA officials contacted Senator Grassley's office and attempted to get Senator Grassley and his staff to not support me, to not believe me, and to not call me as a witness.
The problem for government scientists and federal employees in general is they don't have viable legal rights. There's a Whistleblower Protection Act, which is the strongest free speech law in history on paper, but in reality it's been a trap, a vehicle to rubber stamp whatever harassment the bureaucracy wants to impose on a whistleblower.
Senior FDA officials contacted Tom Devine, my attorney at the Government Accountability Project, and attempted to convince him that he should not represent me because I was a bully, a demagogue, that I was guilty of scientific misconduct, that I was just a terrible person, I couldn't be trusted. And these people were posing as whistleblowers themselves. It turns out that they were senior FDA officials. Some of them are in my supervisory chain, who were involved in a coordinated attempt to discredit me and to smear my name and to prevent me from giving testimony. The week before I testified, the acting commissioner of FDA invited me to his office and offered me a job in the commissioner's office to oversee the revitalization of drug safety for FDA. I mean, obviously, he had been tipped off by people on the Senate Finance Committee who were sympathetic to FDA's status quo that I was going to be called as a witness. And so to preempt that, he's offering me this job, which basically would have been exile to, a fancy title with no real ability to have an impact.
Secrecy enforced by repression in scientific agencies is a severe threat to public health and safety because it sustains the approval of life-threatening drugs when those decisions couldn't be defended if they were made in the light of day.
The United States is one of only 2 countries that so far has allowed pharmaceutical companies to advertise drugs retail to citizens. And this is the only country that has turned healthcare over to business as much as we have. And of course, businesses are mainly interested in maximizing profits and preparing for the next quarterly report.
PR goes a long way in cleaning up a dirty reputation.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright, 'cause I only have eyes for you.
Direct-to-consumer advertising, I think, is a great disservice in general to the American people. We see these wonderful ads of these people, demonstrating their wonderful health, whether they're skating across the ice or they're doing their Tai Chi or whatever it is. And you get this visual impression. Madison Avenue knows that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so they convey an image and they convey a message, and it creates needs or desires where there really isn't a need or a desire.
Part of the problem in America is that through things like direct-to-consumer advertising, the drug company voice dominates the debate about healthcare. Now, this really narrows the focus onto pharmacological solutions to big public health problems. And the trouble with that is there's an opportunity cost, because all the other solutions, all the other potential treatments, all the other potential prevention strategies are pushed out, are overlooked, are ignored because of the dominance of this rich, powerful voice.
Enter a new era of discovery at Bristol-Myers Squibb, where groundbreaking genetic research is underway.
Winning the Tour de France was a victory for cancer medicines. But Luke, it's just the start of incredible things to come. Imagine, Luke, your medical history. The story of your genes on a card you carry in your wallet. Your doctor sees your cancer coming years before and gives you a daily pill to take that could prevent it. Hope, triumph, and the miracle of medicine.
This phenomenon of using celebrities is used across the pharmaceutical industry and across many medical conditions. So for the selling of social anxiety disorder, we saw Ricky Williams used as part of the campaign by GlaxoSmithKline. The big problem here is that people often don't know that the celebrity is on the payroll or money from drug companies is indirectly funding that celebrity campaign.
In these ads, you have the visual image, and that conveys one message. Then you have the speaker, who's in the background, who's speaking over this video that's being shown, and they're telling you what this drug is good for. And then at the end, the auctioneer gets on and says, this drug can cause, and they rattle off, 25 different things in 3 seconds, and you're lucky if you hear anything.
Side effects may include nausea, diarrhea, constipation, dizziness, sweating, tremor, sexual side effects, injury, yawn, abnormal vision, or sleep.
Direct-to-consumer advertising has just elicited this wave of demand, false demand. And then the doctors are just saying, okay, you want this drug, you want the purple pill, here's your script.
I didn't know. I didn't know.
Your doctor knows about a purple pill called Nexium.
There was a recent study in the Journal of the American Medical Association that showed that if patients mentioned a drug that they'd seen on television to their physician, they were much more likely to be prescribed that drug by the doctor. And drug companies know this. That's why they do it. So I think that, for example, would the Vioxx disaster have been as great and as large in the absence of direct-to-consumer advertising? I submit that the numbers would have been far lower than what they were. That direct-to-consumer advertising was part of what made Vioxx a blockbuster drug.
All I want are nights with less pain and mornings with less stiffness. So I can get out here early and show these clams who's boss.
It's amazing. I'll have people come into my office. Oh, Doc, I saw this advertisement. I want that. Gee, I saw this ad where the stomach is on fire. I need that. My stomach is bothering me. So what it does, it's not a good idea because it's promoting drug therapy when we don't know what the disease is. And that's the problem with a lot of medical practice in our country today. We are too prescription-oriented. Oh, you have a stomach ache? You better take this. You have a headache? You take this. Oh, you're depressed? You take this.
And there's a lot of opposition to this, and a lot of it comes from the medical profession. It says that they are hounded by people who want prescriptions based on the kind of advertising we've all seen on television.
It's relieved all day.
The United States has a treaty obligation not to permit their advertising directly to the consumer. And yet this is being done. It's being done for amphetamine. It's being done for methylphenidate, for Ritalin-type drugs. It's being done for Ambien, for sleep drugs. Advertised directly to the consumer, contrary to the U.S. obligations under this treaty. Convention on Psychotropic Substances of 1971.
The information on direct-to-consumer advertising shows that a lot of patients are taking drugs that they don't need because of those ads. But the evidence also shows that the ads increase patient knowledge, and patients will go to their physician asking about a drug or asking about a condition that they might not have inquired about before.
Happy, smart people who are taking drugs and fulfilling their life. It tells you nothing about the drug. There is no educational message here. It is all advertising, and advertising is to sell a product, and that's all it's about.
It costs hundreds of millions of dollars, more than the price of a space shuttle mission.
The truth of the matter is, when money is pouring in to a media outlet, next thing you know, you start getting stories about this breakthrough drug, that breakthrough drug, this wonder drug. It has an effect, no question about it. And boy, there are a lot of advertising dollars going into media these days for pharmaceutical products.
The media is full of stories about the latest medical breakthroughs, and there's a real appetite for more and more news about new medical interventions, possible cures, and a lot of that material gets written by professional ghostwriters for the pharmaceutical industry and then picked up by the news media.
I think the fault is not entirely with the manufacturer. Drug companies are marketing drugs because there are so many new drugs that come out, and not only informed patients but also the physicians need to know about those new products. It's patients themselves who are curious and they want to know more about drugs, and ads are informative.
Doctors often will say, well, I don't pay too much attention to all those drug ads. The truth is, every journal you open is filled with drug ads. Your waiting room has a drug detail man, a fancy word for salesman, waiting in it to see you, and they give you all sorts of gifts and educational materials. And virtually every seminar a doctor may take, and they're required to take these to maintain their hospital privileges and that sort of thing, is paid for by a drug company.
If you look here at the graph on the right, you'll notice a definite increase in efficacy.
and that efficacy extended over the following 9 months. So can I have your guarantee that your next 20 prescriptions will be Efestrol?
Okay.
Fabulous.
I'm convinced.
You can keep the pen.
Thank you. Do you have any hats?
They're called detail people. Are they pharmacologists? Do they have PhDs in science? No. They're salespeople. And they're the ones that interface with physicians. In fact, in many cases, the only knowledge that a physician has about how a medication works and what it does is from this salesperson. They could have been an aluminum siding salesman. They could have been a used car salesman, but they're detailed salespeople. Pays a lot of money.
Vioxx offers your patients unsurpassed clinical efficacy.
Proven efficacy.
This is absolutely the most efficacious drug your patients can use.
A detail person is basically hired by a pharmaceutical company to educate the doctors about the drugs that they sell. And I use that term educate loosely.
So does Zestran work?
About as well as the others.
Price?
We're more expensive. Actually, we're almost double the cost.
Side effects?
Patients won't shit for a week.
There is one industry detail person for every 11 doctors in the country.
The companies are hiring reps that really have no science or medical background. They are not doctors typically, they are not pharmacists, they are not nurses, they're oftentimes business majors and music majors and drama majors, and they're telling your doctors how to prescribe drugs to you, the patient.
Our drug is clearly the most efficaciousest.
Most practicing psychiatrists get their information about new drugs from pharmaceutical company representatives. The pharmaceutical companies spend $8 billion a year on sales representatives, and those sales representatives give out $8 billion in samples a year. So that there's $16 billion being spent on pharmaceutical reps visiting doctors and touting their latest magic remedy.
Obviously, they are attempting to encourage prescribing, providing not just free samples, but oftentimes providing bonus prescriptions to attract consumers. They may invite physicians to conferences, pay their way, perhaps a little holiday in the Bahamas or some beautiful place.
If a doctor says they're having side effects, or if the doctor says the drug isn't working, typically the sales rep will have a very well-rehearsed response to that question that then will ultimately, and hopefully for the rep in that company, turn that objection actually into a sale.
Do you have any patients like Betty in your practice?
Although yes, quite a few.
Well,
Dr. Smith, today I'd like to tell you why new Vioxx is the drug of choice in patients like Betty. Vioxx offers your patients proven, unsurpassed clinical efficacy.
Historically, new medications produce great hope, but we have to make sure there's not too much hype involved as well.
Pharmaceutical companies produce a lot of very beneficial products. The problem is they go well beyond that to create ever new markets and expand the markets that they have. For example, a very high percentage of prescribing is what's called off-label. That means for purposes that were not approved by the FDA. So isn't it strange? We have this whole federal program for testing for safety and efficacy for specific conditions. Then once the drug is approved, it can be prescribed for anything.
The drug industry's put an awful lot of muscle on Congress and on the FDA to keep drugs that are profitable on the market. For a doctor like me, it puts us in an impossible position because drugs that should have been withdrawn may last for months or even years beyond the point where we knew they were dangerous.
A couple of years ago, there were about 600 registered pharmaceutical lobbyists. Today, only a few years later, according to USA Today, there are over 1,200 registered pharmaceutical lobbyists.
There are more lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry in Washington than there are members of Congress. They have enormous checkbooks, and they can spend that money as they see fit. What do lobbyists do? Well, they influence legislators.
They are paying visits to members of Congress and their staff and sort of influencing them to do things the drug industry way, such as forbidding price controls on prescription drugs. In addition to that, the drug companies themselves give money to the members of Congress, and in return they get much more sympathy, both in terms of legislation that may be pending and in terms of the oversight or lack thereof that the Congress exerts over the FDA.
You've got to start to ask, could we have a better regulatory regime here that could protect the public interest more than the profits of the pharmaceutical companies? You have this entanglement at almost every level of medicine. And where it's most pernicious is at the level of the medical journals, which are at the top of the hierarchy. Medical journals are essentially the record of medical science. And even those journals are heavily dependent on drug company funding through advertising.
Scientific studies that are funded by industry are 5 times more likely to show a result that's favorable to drug companies than if the study was funded by an independent source like the National Institutes of Health.
A pharmaceutical company does a drug test, and it gets, or maybe it does 8 studies, let's say, and 6 of them are negative. Well, it publishes the 2 positive ones. So we only have 2 positive results, and the public and doctors, in fact, the medical journals themselves don't know that in 6 of the 8 trials the drug failed.
The Eli Lilly Corporation, a pharmaceutical company, for nearly 15 years covered up their own internal investigation that showed that anyone on Prozac is 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than those using other antidepressants. Not 12 times more than the average population, 12 times more than those already on other antidepressants. This is a criminal act, and I want to know why these criminals are still walking the streets.
At the beginning, I was diagnosed with dysthymia by a therapist, though not by a psychiatrist, and then she suggested medication. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with depression, I guess severe depression at one point, and then I started taking Prozac. At one point, I just started feeling, I couldn't point my finger on it, but I just started feeling weird, just not right. I was having really paranoid thoughts. A week later, I just started to act weird. I started to be manic, and I went to work, and everything that everybody said was just like this deep thing. Like, I read into it whatever I wanted straight into it. I would look at people and I would think, wow, I've been really mean to you the whole time I've worked here, which, I mean, I hadn't, but this is what I'm thinking, and I start crying. Meanwhile, the conversation we're having is, how's your day? How's your day? Oh, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Meanwhile, I'm looking at him like crying. And everyone knew I wasn't quite right.
Under the guise of training, the drug companies pay for professorships. In some cases, they support whole laboratories and universities. They pay for the distribution of major journals, such as the Archives of General Psychiatry, which is sent to all the psychiatrists in the country free of charge because a drug company pays for it.
I left work that day, got on the subway. I had to get off. I couldn't. I went to my friend's job, and I was like, you have to pay for a cab for me to get home because I can't be on the subway. I kept thinking that I smelled. I kept thinking that people were looking at me and talking about me. From there on, and it just got worse and worse.
We're talking about a symbiotic relationship between psychiatry and the drug industry. Reminds one a little bit of what Eisenhower talked about when he left office about the military-industrial complex. You have to watch out for what they're doing because they'll just take over.
I knew, and I think people know, that they're not okay, that there's just something is awry, but there's nothing you can do about it.
The pharmaceutical industry is extraordinarily powerful. They just have very, very deep pockets and pretty much do what they want.
They provide lecturers around the country. They sponsor the vast majority of the credit courses doctors have to take to keep their licenses up to date. They provide free conferences in the conferences of the annual meetings of the psychiatric and medical associations. They'll provide dinners and music and breakfasts. It's like a drug company carnival when you go to the annual American Psychiatric Association meetings.
I knew why. I knew it was the drug, and I felt like hopefully it wouldn't get worse, but it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And a lot of it I just don't remember. Honestly, I feel fortunate to have blacked out, and you know, I mean, I don't want to remember, or I don't want to know all of the things that I did. I know enough, and while I know it wasn't me, and while I know it wasn't my fault and it was the effect of the drug, it's still unpleasant to think of yourself doing these things. But it got to the point where apparently I was getting violent. So then they eventually, because of that, they had to call the ambulance to come get me.
You could hardly find an academic psychiatrist who is not on the payroll of a drug company. The New England Journal of Medicine, for example, looked for an expert in antidepressant drugs to write a review of antidepressant drugs, and they could not find anyone who qualified as an expert who was not on the payroll of one of the companies making the drugs. I mean, it's like they've bought the field.
I remember being put on the stretcher and taken out. I remember being outside and feeling like, just knowing like, okay, like there's an ambulance and I'm on a stretcher. I was just terrified. And I remember I'm in the ambulance and my parents are in there and I'm just really scared. And I went and got to the hospital and I was examined by the doctor. And then they took me to a place, you know, armed guard, like very dark. I weren't allowed to leave a room. So I was in that place, I don't even really know for how long. And we're sort of coming to, I guess, when I was there and asking my mother, you know, what day it was. And I was really surprised. It was like a week later than I thought it was.
But you know something, I'll tell you, I have a lot of drug reps coming into my office. And they start giving me studies. Now, I'm a big believer in research. I've done a lot of scientific research myself, and I continue. But I very frequently tell them, hey, you know, you sponsored this program. Of course you're going to get good results. And that is the problem with a lot of research in this country. The drug companies, if you figure, take one drug, say a statin drug, it's not only sold in the United States, it's sold all over the world. So if a doctor writes one prescription, that's like an annuity to these drug companies. They have unending amounts of money.
The United States makes up less than 5% of the world's population. But in terms of the world's total bill for prescription drugs, the US makes up about half of it. So the cost of drugs and the number of prescription drugs being consumed by Americans is just through the roof.
The pharmaceutical companies are making money hand over fist. The sicker we are, the more profit for their stockholders.
I just saw an ad the other day that said, well, not enough people are taking statin drugs for heart conditions. But there was no mention of why not change your lifestyle to prevent the condition in the first place. No mention. Or what role nutrients might play in helping lessen elevated cholesterol or elevated blood pressure, because the science shows that you can do that. But it's not being promoted because it's not patentable. It's not profitable. You don't get, what do you get on this? 35 to 40% markup? Take a look at the markup on drugs.
Look at Lipitor. 20 milligrams, $272 what you pay. Their cost $580, 4,500% markup. Then look at the real big one, Prozac. Prozac, 20 milligrams, cost you $247, cost them 11 cents. 224,000% markup. But they're not the worst of them. The worst of them is Xanax. 1 milligram, 1 little milligram. You pay $136, it costs them 2 cents.
they make a 569,000% markup.
We've had a 60% improvement in our production efficiency. We have the cost of Glucodox down to 10 cents a pill.
Wow, it looks like Braden Andrews gave us a great deal. Only $12 a pill on Glucodox.
30 tablets of Glucodox comes to a total of $580.
Well, I don't have that kind of money.
Don't you have insurance?
I got laid off.
There are different studies on how many uninsured poor people there are. The numbers range between 49 million and 67 million. It's a big group. And what makes this even worse is that they are, quite frankly, the only ones paying these very high drug prices, twice as high as in Europe and Canada. The rest of us who are fortunate enough to have insurance, we have a pharmacy benefit manager negotiating drug prices. And you know what? Those negotiated prices are the same as in Europe, the same as in Canada. The only ones that pay these very high inflated prices are the poor, the uninsured. So the fight for what the drug companies call a free market is really a fight to charge our poorest the highest price. And that is immoral.
We've been led to believe that we have the finest medicine in the world. The great medical schools, Harvard and Stanford and Columbia and New York University medical schools, that we have the best doctors, nurses, medicines, medical technology. And in some areas, that's certainly true. But what about the other side of the story? I decided to take a look at what is known as iatrogenic disease or disorder, medically induced. And it's frightening.
I didn't know he'd stopped breathing at first. He was a little fussy that morning. And I noticed that he was very still. I noticed he was still. Then in a matter of, I would say, 10 seconds, that inner panic started to hit me. Uh-oh, something's wrong. So I did some mouth-to-mouth, established he still wasn't breathing. I checked the air passages. I was starting to get really scared. And then I think sense kicked in, and I drove like a wild banshee. I put the pedal to the floor. I ran red lights. Fishtailed into the emergency room, and I handed the baby over the counter in the emergency room and I said, please make him breathe again. He's not breathing.
Ellen had called me, and I probably got this call somewhere around noon, and I dropped the phone and sped off to the hospital, and all these people were crowded in this room working on our son.
It was a code blue moment and quite hectic. They put the tube down to help breathe. It kept going in his stomach, and when they pumped the bag, he would become distended.
And everyone was frantic, and no one would tell us anything that was going on. Alan was trying to find out what was going on.
They got him resuscitated. Talking to the doctors, they were saying, well, we think it's sepsis. We're going to take him to the bigger hospital, Florida hospital.
And there we sat, and sat, and sat. And then finally, this doctor, Dr. Ben Getz, he came and got us from a waiting room, and he escorted us into this small room and sat us down.
He said, your baby has broken ribs and bleeding on the brain, and he's going to die.
At that point, I immediately lost it, and Ellen was just in absolute shock. You know, do we have the right child here? Are we talking about our kid, our son?
I mean, I seriously thought he had the wrong baby.
And this doctor, it was so strange because he was so cold.
At this time, I can see Francine. She grabbed the rails of her chair. And I'm trying to tell this doctor he's crazy. Oh, you got the wrong baby, and blah, blah, blah. And he's saying, no, this is your baby. And we have the x-rays here and this, that, other. We need to know what happened. And at that point, that was about the first air of suspicion that I felt.
Investigators were called in, and they sat and they talked to us.
And they grilled me. The white hot spotlight, over and over. Did you shake him? No. Did you hurt him? No. Did you hit him? No. Did he drop? No. Did he fall? No. We were there till 2 or 3 in the morning, and they wouldn't let us stay there. We'd come back the next day. Francine had left early to go by herself. I was getting a ride from a neighbor. We stopped at a convenience store, and I was waiting in the car while she had went in to get some food item of some such. And the 2 detectives had come to the front of the car, and they had said, "We were looking for you. What are you doing?"
It was a setup, basically, is what it was. When Alan pulled up, they pulled up right afterwards. They were waiting. They told Alan to get out of the car, that they were arresting him, something in reference to do with our son, and that they were going to rough him up.
They eventually put me in jail there. At this point, Alan had not died. He was still on life support.
Our son remained in critical care in Florida Hospital. He was there for 3 days when I was approached by the doctor and TransLife, which is an organ harvesting team. They had come to me and explained that basically my son was brain dead.
Went to trial. We had one expert, very respected pathologist, in fact, nationally known, and they had 5 local doctors, all contracted, and we lost. Our expert said this was not a traumatic death. The bleeding happened in the hospital. The tissue markers are clear. It's not even arguable. They argued it anyway. Jury believed them. Got sentenced to life in prison, no parole, plus 10 years.
And what I remember about Alan Yurko's trial was, in spite of the fact that the evidence was complicated, technical, comprising of expert opinions, that the jurors only deliberated 3.5 hours. That leads me to have serious doubts whether they fully deliberated, discussed all the aspects of it, tested the evidence as they're sworn to do.
We were outnumbered by state's experts compared to our defense expert. They had 5 to our 1. And unfortunately, that's the situation that many cases face because the prosecution has unlimited funding.
I told Francine my plan. Looking back on it, it's kind of funny because I would say, I'm going to rally the medical community. We're going to have people supporting us, and we're going to do this, and I'm going to, you know, ranting. I don't think I believed it myself. But it sounded good, and it kept me going.
I have never seen any behavior or personality issues that could even give me any remote possibility that he could do something like this to our child.
I started to research. I started to bring in books. And I started to notice things that were wrong.
In August of 2002, I received an email from Alan Yurko, asking me if I can evaluate their case, and I was in shock to know the way our medical system, how they handle the cases of shaken baby syndrome.
The weakness in Alan Yurko's case is the medical examiner's testimony and the medical examiner's opinion of the cause of the child's death. The medical examiner, to a large extent, and that's Dr. Shashi Gore, has been, in this case, largely discredited. Now, he's been discredited in a lot of other cases, too, but just in this case, he had commentary about examining the child's heart. The child's heart had been removed for transplant before the autopsy, so he never examined the heart.
And then it's quoted that the baby was black, but the baby was white.
There are so many different discrepancies that are within this autopsy, it makes you wonder, whose child was he looking at?
Francine never identified the body at the morgue. She was never called to her. So now we're wondering, maybe that really wasn't him. Maybe there was a really big mix-up, and this isn't just clerical errors. This isn't just bungling.
We began what has become to be known the Yurko Project. The Yurko Project helps families and caregivers that are in similar or same straits. It's no longer just about Alan Yurko in the case of our family. It's about so many others out there.
He really has been able to generate the interest and support of a lot of people who now have what I have come to believe is the real explanation of his son's death.
At 2 months old, he was given his routine vaccinations, which included the DTaP shot, that's a 3-in-1, the hepatitis B, the Hib, and the polio, all in one day. And immediately, when he was given those shots, immediately afterwards is when he started to have reactions to them.
When a mother takes her child into a doctor, a perfectly healthy, bright child, into a doctor, and that child gets vaccinated, at this point sometimes with 9 or 10 different vaccines on one day, and that child then deteriorates before her eyes and regresses physically, mentally, and emotionally and becomes a totally different child. This is such a powerful experience that it doesn't matter what the official doctors in the public health agencies say.
I did not go through a normal pregnancy. It was riddled with many complications, and it did not even go through full term.
He was premature. He was febrile. He wasn't well.
Virtually every single week, we had taken our son into the pediatrician for one thing or another. You know, his belly would be bloated up. He would have problems with constipation or diarrhea. Regardless of all those things that were still going on with him, he received all 6 of those shots in one day.
The baby at 2 months, he's only 3 weeks old. He's not 2 months old because he was 5 weeks premature. Second is, you don't vaccinate a child with a lot of problem.
We have a situation where every child is required to receive a substantial number of vaccinations, maybe as many as 20, from the time they're 6 months old until they're maybe, well, before they go to school. We know that some percentage of those children will be maimed and some will die. We know that. And we have a federal program that compensates parents for the death and maiming of their children. We've put more than $1.5 billion in that program in the last decade and a half. That's $1.5 billion that have gone to pay for children that were killed or maimed by a product which we knew was going to kill or maim them. The only issue is we didn't know which ones.
Back when I was growing up, we maybe got half a dozen shots before we even entered into the school system. Nowadays, it's something outrageous, like 33 different shots before they even hit kindergarten.
I think pharmaceutical companies play a tremendous role in the rush to have our children use more and more vaccines. They're a very powerful lobby. They're one of the biggest businesses in the world, and I think that there is pressure that's placed, particularly on legislators at the state level, along with medical organizations that join with the pharmaceutical lobby to press for mandates for these vaccines so that every child basically has to use them in order to get into school.
You know, there are many MDs, pediatricians, who refuse to see an unvaccinated child. They won't let them into their practice. Now, I think that's an abrogation of their Hippocratic oath. I mean, if they really believed in the efficacy of vaccinations, if a kid is unvaccinated, they'd want that child under their care. They'd want to keep an eye on them because they're unprotected. But in fact, they won't even let them come into the office. This is practicing modern medicine, or is this modern medical hypocrisy? I think it's hypocrisy.
Those vaccines were the final straw, I believe, on his body that shut him down. He couldn't handle everything else that he was dealing with on top of the insult of all those vaccines into his system.
Some of the symptoms that baby Alan was showing actually were consistent with vaccine damage. Some of the vaccine-related injuries mock the symptoms of shaken baby syndrome.
There are so many things that are in these vaccines. The formaldehyde, the mercury, or the aerosol as it's called, the aluminum, acetone. But yet we continue to pump this into our children at high amounts.
At first, I just wanted to get out of prison, go home and be with my family, clear my name, make this right. I didn't care about everybody else's family. I could have cared less. I was thinking about me. But after you get into the books and you start looking at what really is going on, there's just no way you can't start saying, oh my God, 6,000 babies died last year from a bad vaccine? I'm nothing. This case is nothing compared to that. It's nothing at all. There's kids dying every day from bad medicine.
Within the last 10 years, nearly 8 million people have died as a result of using the conventional medical system. That's nearly 800,000 people every year. This is just extraordinary. These diseases are absolutely misclassified. People are not dying from necessarily cardiovascular disease and cancers. They're dying from choosing systems that are not treating those causes. And it's just extraordinarily tragic that the vast majority of Americans need to suffer this type of injustice without having a more careful look at what truly is causing their problem.
Physicians obviously want to prescribe a drug that does more good than harm, but all too often, partly because they're under the influence as our patients of this massive and misleading prescription drug advertising, they wind up prescribing a drug that does more harm than good, killing people or injuring them so seriously they have to be put in the hospital.
The evidence we have now is that immediately when my son was transferred to Florida Hospital, a CT scan was ordered at 2:45 p.m., just a couple hours after he was admitted. A right arterial heparin line. This was not a flush. This was a line for heparin. Heparin is an anticoagulant. It promotes bleeding. It prolongs bleeding. It triggers and causes complications of bleeding.
It is unbelievable that the physician gave high doses of heparin, 8.8 times the therapeutic dose.
He installed the line himself, not a nurse. This is Dr. Gates.
They give heparin before, transplant, before they take the organ.
He did not have consent for organs at this time. My son was not established to be brain dead at this time. In fact, he wasn't established to be brain dead for 48 hours.
They went and arrested Alan the second day. Immediately they sent the report to the child protections, and they determined that Alan caused the injury by violent shaking his baby. It is unbelievable to do that without waiting at the end and see the autopsy result and to review the medical record of the baby and see what is going on. It is very hard to believe they acted in this way.
What's funny is it's all documented. He appears to have wanted only the organs. He appears to have played God.
Why you present bruises less than 1 day old? It happened in the hospital. And he took pictures of these bruises and he showed in court as an evidence because they want to influence the thinking of the jury. This is a corruption.
Many of these doctors should be ashamed of themselves for how they practice medicine. They did take a Hippocratic oath to preserve life, not to maximize their salary.
The estimate was 100,000 deaths every year from adverse drug reactions, and in addition, 1.5 million people injured so seriously from adverse drug reactions that they had to be hospitalized.
I believe poor medicine and poor diagnosis, assembly line diagnosis, lazy medicine, and iatrogeny is leading to a great number, vast number of innocent people being accused.
Do you feel now that there's a chance in your mind that
Alan Yurko is an innocent man?
Well, I think there's a good chance that Alan Yurko is innocent. When you bring all this up that I've been told after the trial, I mean, if I'd have known all that I was told about, you know, what they give the baby and all that, why, I don't think I'd ever found him guilty.
I'm not even mad at Shashi Gore or anything right now. Right now, I'm just glad to be out amongst the stars and the clouds.
On the weekends. I told him what was going on with your case. I said, Len, I was just at Alan's hearing all day. I told him how you guys were doing really good. And so he mentioned it on the radio, man, which is awesome, buddy.
Yeah, the lady came over and said,
yeah.
She's completely holistic health.
Buddy, we're on it, man. We're making sure this is going big time.
The Yurko project per se, we do plan some aggressive action, and we're going to target a couple cases, and we're going to try and bring them into the spotlight like ours has. We're looking at some other cases that don't necessarily involve shaken baby syndrome per se, but medical mistakes, the death by medicine. 1 in 20 people check into a hospital are going to die from a mistake. And that's probably an understated statistic.
Back then, I was not educated to the ways of vaccines. I didn't understand how they worked. I didn't understand what was in them. I didn't understand about vaccine reactions. And I feel a certain amount of responsibility that I allowed him to have those vaccines. That perhaps, if he hadn't, this may have been avoided.
I worshipped the vaccines just like people do blindly. I thought they were the sacred cow. Never would question them. So I, in effect, arbitrarily trusted my son's life to a stranger. Man I never knew. Just kind of trusted him because he had a white coat on.
The first year that I was in medical school, I got a gift in my mailbox. It was a stethoscope from Eli Lilly, and every one of the medical students in my class got the very same gift. And a few weeks later, we got free books. Not just 1 or 2, but a whole stack of free books from another drug manufacturer. And that pattern continues. They're essentially courting the medical students, encouraging them to think drugs first.
Traditionally, most doctors tend to practice what they learned in medical school, and they don't tend to think outside what they've been taught. And it's very difficult to change gears in the middle of your career and think about another approach. You know, when antibiotics first came on the market, a lot of doctors were resistant to the idea. It made no sense that you could take something from a penicillin mold, inject it into a human, and cure pneumonia. It didn't make intuitive sense, and it didn't go along with what they'd been taught. And it took a re-education campaign. And I think it's really just a question of education.
In theory, doctors have a pretty free hand in their day-to-day practice, but much of what they do actually ends up being controlled to a great degree by the wishes of the pharmaceutical industry or other entities, and that's simply because these entities control an awful lot of the education that doctors get, as well as funding, in some cases directly, the positions that doctors may hold.
State medical boards have traditionally been antagonistic to most complementary physicians, and one wonders why so, because I believe they perceive it as a threat to their very challenged and flawed paradigm, which is really not addressed on foundational truths, but more on a position where they're increasing the revenues of the pharmaceutical companies.
2 doctors, both trained the same, both board certified. One, after 10 years, sees that they're not really helping the patients. So he begins to take extra courses in nutrition and lifestyle. And gradually, he begins to implement what he's learned and make changes in how he treats patients. Today, 20 years later, he's able to help patients that before he could never help. Why is it that one doctor will take a step ahead? It's called complementary medicine. He could stay safely and just do the traditional practice and be rewarded, have no hassles, no controversy, and yet he chose to broaden his knowledge so he could better help patients.
I would encourage the orthodox research establishments to generate a more open mind toward thinking about alternative and nutritional approaches, and to try and end the war that's traditionally exists between the orthodoxy and the alternative.
I left my conventional Western medical practice after 10 years because I was told to churn out 25 patients a day because reimbursements from insurance companies were down, and then I had my internal pressure of feeling bad that I'd make patients wait for hours because I was trying to do the right thing by them. And I actually quit my job because of the stress I had chest pain. I mean, I was really stressed out because I had this pressure on me to practice a way of medical care that I felt was just not good.
Part of it is that they're getting nickel and dime by HMOs to spend only 5 or 10 minutes with a patient, much faster to write a prescription than to talk through a prescription for a lifestyle change.
In our practice, we use a very aggressive nutritional program to treat cancer. We don't use chemotherapy or radiation. We do only nutritional work in our practice, and we treat generally very advanced cancer, and generally with very good success. Our nutritional approach involves 3 basic components as a start. First, diet. Each patient gets a diet designed for their particular metabolic needs. The diets all require the patients eat predominantly organic food, whole foods, whole grains, no white flour, white sugar, no junky food, no synthetic chemicals, no synthetic foods. The second component of our program involves large doses of nutritional supplements. Now, my average cancer patient will take 160 pills a day spread through the day. Again, the supplement protocols, like the diet, are very individualized. The main anti-cancer element are large doses of specially designed proteolytic pancreatic enzymes that we believe have an anti-cancer effect. The third component of our program involves aggressive detoxification, which we think is absolutely critical as the diet and the supplements. A lot of physicians, particularly orthodox physicians, never consider detoxification or even understand what it means. Basically, detoxification refers to simple procedures that help the body mobilize, neutralize, and excrete toxic waste. Particularly with cancer patients, detoxification is very important because it's great to be able to kill a tumor, but as you kill a tumor, it starts breaking down. Enormous amounts of dead tumor waste are released into the body, and these can be very toxic, can make the patient very sick. So we have a series of procedures, we use some of which go back 100 years, like juice fast, that we find very efficiently help the body mobilize and get rid of all this toxic waste. In 1993, the National Cancer Institute invited me down to Washington to present my cases as one of their first efforts to objectively evaluate an alternative practitioner. Based on that presentation, the NCI suggested I do a pilot study with advanced pancreatic cancer, and their attitude is if I could show any results with even 10 patients with pancreatic cancer, this would warrant a bigger study. We got the study completed, and the statistics and the results were better than anything that had ever been published for advanced pancreatic cancer. And I think it's efforts like this that are going to help change the mindset of the orthodox oncology establishment and the orthodox medical world in general.
I think most of us would agree with the concept that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem the policy that the insurance industry has adopted in this country. If you examine carefully the way that the bills are paid, they tend to have expert physicians who are heavily influenced by the conventional medical paradigm, which of course is influenced by the drug industry. So these are physicians who are going to be in line with recommending treatments and therapies that are very expensive and tend to ignore much of the foundational scientific literature within the last decade or two that has clearly demonstrated the effectiveness of many of the preventive techniques, such as changing of the diet and lifestyle recommendations and stress reductions and exercises, which are far less expensive and in most cases more effective than most of the expensive therapies being allowed and covered by the third-party insurance carriers.
The health status of Americans is improving a lot. I attribute much of that improvement in health status to pharmaceuticals. Look what people are consuming these days in the way of drugs, especially those over 65. They're taking multiple drugs.
Longevity has improved over the last 100 years or so, not because of medications, but because of changes in our lifestyle. Number one is better sanitation, so that we have better hygiene, and we're not getting the infectious illnesses that were rampant decades ago. But we've turned a corner where now our nutrition is worse. We're using more and more and more medications to try to make up for that fact. And a recent study has shown that the next generation will not live as long as their parents. They could die as much as 5 years earlier. So all the medication in the world doesn't make you live that much longer. Public health is what really counts, and unfortunately that's starting to suffer.
The natural health movement is largely from down up. It occurs from the public, who have become more and more educated by reading various books, by internet, which they can get lots of information. It is they that are moving the natural health movement on because of the excellent results they're getting. So they tell their family, they tell their friends about it, and eventually it gets up and they tell their physicians about it. And so it is basically the physicians in large part are being educated by their patients rather than the other way around. And professionals are very uncomfortable with this because they have their patients coming in, and the patients know a lot more about these natural things than the physician. So some of them will simply take a position that this is nonsense or quackery and dismiss it.
Quack, another word for fraud or fake. Thousands of quack medical products, all are a waste of money. Many endanger your health. So before buying a questionable cure, ask your doctor or pharmacist first, because the next dead duck could be you.
The FDA has had a 50-year campaign of attacking all alternative therapies. Vitamins, organic produce, you name it, it was up on their radar screen. If you were a physician, you were attacked. If you were a consumer advocate, you were attacked. The FDA was merciless in going after everything in the natural field. Things that people today just say, take for granted. Well, there were people who had to fight the hard fight for you to have your right to take these supplements and eat these foods.
This is Dr. Rice's formula. Tell me, why is this good?
Well, this has a lot of nutrients. It's like a multivitamin.
On 6th of May, 1992, some 10 minutes before we were set to open the clinic, folks were getting out charts and mixing IV solutions. The clinic doors were still locked when the front door burst open. Someone had kicked it in and came running in, pulled out a gun, and approached within 2 to 3 feet of our receptionist, and his cohorts ran through the clinic yelling, "Raid, raid, raid!" And they rounded up all of the employees and had them go out to the waiting room. Then they presented a search warrant. They were there to seize our B-complex vitamins and our vitamin B12 and our folic acid and some injectable herbs and so forth. And excuse me, you need armed force to seize B vitamins? They then kicked us all out of the clinic. We couldn't come in either, never mind the patients. They spent about 14 hours. They drew up a couple of big old vans, filling them full of clinic medical records. They took people's personal, private, confidential records. They took employee records. They even took some of our postage stamps, a couple of rolls of those little stamps with the flags on them, you know. FDA raided our clinic to seize preservative-free, totally pure, injectable B vitamins. We had gone to great lengths to get preservative-free, single-dose, totally enclosed in glass, and that way it can be preservative-free because no contaminants can get in, totally enclosed in glass B-complex vitamin injection. And the reason we had done that was because some of the folks we work with, indeed it's a minority, but a few of them were so sensitive that if we gave them B vitamin injections with a preservative, they'd get a bad headache or they'd get a rash or some other bad effect. So we had located some from an American distributor that happened to be made in Germany. Now we bought them from a distributor here in the States. So we figured it must be legal. Actually, we didn't even think about whether it was legal. We just bought them from the distributor in the States. But FDA had a big problem because they were made in Germany. And apparently the folks in Germany had not paid the fees to the FDA that FDA would like to have paid in order to gain, quote, approval, unquote.
The major problem with FDA censorship is that there are tens of thousands of scientific studies that validate the safety and efficacy of dietary supplements. Those are buried in the scientific literature. The lay public doesn't have access to a lot of that material. The FDA does not allow companies that sell products based on that scientific research to inform the public.
If you said that water cured kidney failure or cured arthritis, the water becomes a drug. There is no innate chemical composition that makes something a drug. It's all about what you say about it. And if you say something can cure a disease, it is a drug, and your making that statement turns that transaction into a felony. And people have been charged with felonies under FDA law for introducing a product over the internet, for making statements over the net that a product was beneficial in various diseases.
I have a report done by the Legal Defense Fund that was organized at the time of our clinic raid that lists over 20 raids done by FDA on clinics, vitamin manufacturers, and so on between the years 1985 and 1993. It's a long list, it's very sad, and it's, of course, a total waste of everyone's tax dollars.
The Life Extension Foundation has been battling FDA censorship for the past 24 years. As a result, when people are attacked by the FDA who are offering legitimate dietary supplements to the public, we're often the first people that they call. We assist them with finding attorneys that can help them, and we also hear the horror stories. We hear of people whose businesses are shut down, who are facing bankruptcy because of the attorney's fees that they're facing. We hear of people who are facing long prison sentences simply for telling the public the truth about what a dietary supplement may do to prevent or treat a disease.
Alternative practitioners have been sanctioned and harassed pretty much throughout history, but certainly in the last 30 or 40 years when they deviate from so-called standard medical care. The physicians who focus attention on the environment, on dealing with toxicity, on dealing with nutritional factors, dealing with lifestyle factors to try to help people long term, are often ridiculed, harassed, and even brought up on charges where some of them will wind up losing their licenses for relatively minor infractions.
Back in 1945, Time magazine had a famous little article about the benefits of vitamin E in preventing heart conditions and in helping heart health. And from 1945 until the time the AMA finally admitted that vitamin E had an important role to play in promoting heart health, 50 million Americans died of preventable heart disease. You know, this Holocaust was basically promoted by people who were not willing to look at advances in science, who are not willing to look at the lifestyle changes that people in the alternative community have supported for decades.
Just when we believed it was safe to change our lifestyle, eat healthy foods, to lose weight, and to feel good about ourselves and take our supplements, up comes Codex Alimentarius. It's been about 7 years. Now it's getting to the final stages, and even though it's in Europe, we better pay close attention because it could impact our freedoms of choice right here in the United States.
Codex Alimentarius, the World Food Code, is basically an attempt to harmonize law internationally so that trade can be smoother, can go between countries easier. But the problem is that the way they're harmonizing laws internationally, they're applying the wrong model. Our fear is that in the harmonization process, that law is going to be shortchanged. The FDA itself says on its own website that where there are international standards, our laws are going to be harmonized to those standards. Congress, however, has made it really clear vitamins, minerals, and herbs are foods, not drugs. We don't want them harmonized to those drug standards because they're not drugs.
Codex is a treaty that would control the amounts of nutrients in vitamins. In Europe, you can't get more than 60 milligrams of vitamin C in a pill. That's worthless. Vitamin C is very good at 1,000 milligram doses, a gram. That's what the studies show. It has a huge benefit. If we were to adopt the rules of Europe and Canada for our vitamins, we wouldn't have vitamins.
The FDA says because we don't regulate them heavily enough, the supplements, therefore, could be dangerous. And yet, if you look at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, if you look at their data, it reveals that there aren't any fatalities, that there aren't any significant injuries from the use of dietary supplements, whereas adverse reactions to prescription drugs are one of the leading causes of death in this country.
I think the real impetus going back 30 years was to get drug company control of nutritional supplements. If they were prescription items, they could increase the cost. You'd have to see a doctor. It would increase income into the medical community, whereas now people can just go to their health food store and buy it. But that's the way it should be. These are supplements. These are not prescription medications. These are food supplements. They're derived essentially from food substances, so they should be over the counter.
FDA is out there trying to protect their market. On one hand, the patent medications are, on the other hand, quietly buying up many of the vitamin, mineral, and herbal companies. They know this.
One thing that concerns me is if that supplements became a prescription item, our pancreatic enzymes may no longer be available over the counter. But we use specialized enzymes that are made for us specifically in New Zealand for our program, and it would certainly complicate the issue. So I think it would be a disaster if there was a sudden law passed that made all supplements a prescription item, because that would include pancreatic enzymes, which are the essence of our program, and people's lives are at stake.
It takes a lot of exposure to educate the public, because on the other side you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar industry that pumps out information day after day after day after day, year after year after year, and a little bit of public controversy is not going to be adequate to change public attitudes.
Prescription drugs, sell over $150 billion a year, and the profit is enormous. So if you talk about what makes the most sense, it isn't necessarily what makes the most sense that really wins the day. It's what makes the most dollars and cents that seems to win the day.
For every member of the House of Representatives, somebody in their district died because of Vioxx. Somebody in their district had a heart attack because of Vioxx. It doesn't matter whether it's a red state or a blue state. These are human beings, and what we're talking about is public health. Public health is nonpartisan.
Most Americans engage in dangerous dietary habits. They don't take the supplements they need to prevent disease. The end result is most of the Americans dying in this country today are doing so prematurely. Their lives could be dramatically extended if the information could be released.
The raid on our clinic is part of the greater war about, do we make medicines selling high-priced patented molecules which occasionally are life-saving but never really achieve any true healing, or do we migrate towards a more natural lifestyle where we improve our diets, get some exercise, take some supplements, and in many cases achieve healing, or at least a much better state of health than we would ever achieve by taking those high-priced, money-generating patent medications?
There will always be a role for medication in medical practice, but it ought to be our last resort, not our first resort. And the problem is, when we turn to medicine as our first treatment, we get iatrogenic illnesses and deaths. The person is injured or killed by the medication that was prescribed by the doctor. We need a new mandate, and the mandate is this. Every HMO, every doctor's office, every hospital should be required, when they're writing out a prescription, to think, is there a non-medical approach that might be more effective, a non-pharmaceutical approach that might work better and mean that we don't have to go to this expense and put the patient at risk?
We're looking at a systematic failure in the entire healthcare system, with so many entities profiting of the existing system that it's very hard to effect change. But I think we can effect change. We're going to have an explosion in elderly people. Those elderly people will need health care. The costs are going to explode. People are not going to want to pay higher insurance premiums and taxes. So I think the people who watch this, together with politicians and others, can actually effect change.
I was drinking 20 cups of coffee a day, and I was using this, of course, putting in the hours and not doing any exercise or getting any energy from the food that I was eating. I was always tired. I began to feel dizzy. If I walked even more than the 3 blocks. I was out of breath when I walked the 3 blocks to the subway, but if I did any strenuous work at all, I would immediately become short of breath. I decided to check that out, and I went to my primary care physician. He gave me the blood pressure test, said that I was 150 over 110, also gave me a cardiogram, then called me into his office after he looked at the results of that and said, "Jim, we're looking at possible angioplasty." He wrote me a prescription for atenolol, which supposedly lowers your blood pressure. I called a friend, and they said, "Jim, if you're going to do something else, do it. Don't take that medicine right away, because once you're on it, and you have to keep taking it." I decided that that was kind of a wake-up call from someone telling me this is perhaps the right time to make some changes in your life before it's too late, and before I have to start thinking about angioplasty. And that's when I started on what I consider my road to recovery and my road to a wholesome life. By stopping, of course, the coffee and the milk and the sugar that came with the coffee, cutting out meat completely, increasing the vegetables, starting to take the correct kind of supplements, I began to see my energy come back. Not only my energy come back, but my mental energy come back. I began to become more alert and remembering things more. Gradually, it started to reverse itself, and I began to feel, that I'm living again.
Come on. Up. Beautiful.
Today, I am 66 years old. My life is just beginning. If there's anything I've learned, it's that it does not matter what other people say or do. What matters is how I choose to react and what I choose to believe about myself.
We have to make choices. Be proactive. Get involved in your own health and those of your children. I'm Gary Knoll. Thank you very much for watching.
You've got a headache, and I've got some strange disease. Don't worry about it. This pill will set your mind at ease. It's called Vioxx. It's made by Squab Merle Co. It's a life-enhancing miracle, but there are some things you should know.
It may cause agitation, palpitations, excessive salivation, constipation, male lactation, rust-colored urination, hallucinations, bad vibrations, mild electric shock sensations.
But it's worth it for the drugs I need. My disease may not be fatal, but I can ease my fears by taking 2 $12 pills each day for 50 years. They've spent billions to convince me, so now I realize Vioxx beats diet and exercise. I've got insurance, at least for now I do. And if I bought generic, it would cut my costs in two. But I want Vioxx, 'cause I saw it on TV. Those families look so functional, that Paisley pills for me.
But it may cause deprivation, humiliation, debtor's prison and deportation. Dark depictions, dire predictions, life as seen in Dickens fiction. Empty pockets, court dockets, may cause eyes to pop from sockets.
But it's worth it for the drugs I need.